Good evening all, and welcome back to Untold Fears. Tonight we are traveling north into the frozen heart of Manitoba, where lonely highways, silent lakes, and forgotten towns hide some of the most disturbing true horror you have never heard of. These are not campfire tales or internet rumors, but real encounters from ordinary people who stepped out into the cold and discovered that something out there was already waiting for them. As you listen, pay attention to the places you recognize, the roads you have driven, and the shadows you have passed without a second thought, because every story tonight could easily belong to someone you know, or to you. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Untold Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let's step into the shadows of the Manitoba deep woods, where civilization ends and terror begins. The first time it happened, it did not feel like the start of a horror story. It felt like one of those small, irritating mysteries you shrug off and forget by morning. This was about 3 winters ago, and even now the memory of that house outside Dauphin still makes my stomach knot. I had moved there for quiet, for cheap rent, and for the kind of solitude you tell yourself will be good for your mental health. Instead, I ended up learning what it feels like when a place slowly decides you do not belong in it. The house itself was an old one-story farmhouse sitting alone on a flat stretch of prairie, a little under 20 minutes outside town. The fields around it were bare, just snow-covered emptiness, broken by a few dark lines of trees and a distant gravel road. The nearest neighbor was a good 10-minute drive away. In summer, it might have felt peaceful. In January, with snowbanks up to the windowsills and daylight gone by late afternoon, it felt like I was camping at the end of the world. I moved in at the start of a cold snap. The landlord cheerfully told me that the furnace is a beast and that the wind likes to sing in the eaves. The place had character, he said, like that was a good thing. Inside, it was small but cozy. Creaky wooden floors, old radiators that hissed and clanged, and narrow windows that let in more cold than light. The thing I hated from the start was the back mudroom. It was tacked onto the house like an afterthought, a narrow, uninsulated space with a concrete floor, a coat rack, and a door that led directly to the yard. That back door became the center of everything. For the first couple weeks, nothing happened. Life settled into a routine. I worked in town, drove home in the early evenings, made dinner, and wrapped myself in blankets while the wind howled outside. It was lonely, sure, but it was a manageable kind of lonely. I had my phone, my shows, and calls with my sister Hannah, who kept nagging me to move back to the city. I remember telling her that the worst part of the place was just how loud the old house was at night. The furnace kicked on with a groan, the walls popped with the temperature changes, and the wind scraped branches across the siding. It was easy to blame everything on the wind. The first red flag came home with me on a Tuesday night. I had been late leaving work because of a storm warning. By the time I turned off the highway, the road was a tunnel of blowing snow, and my headlights were catching more white than black. When I finally pulled into the rutted driveway, the farmhouse was a dim yellow box in the blizzard, the porch light haloed in ice crystals. I parked, grabbed my bag, and trudged around to the back mudroom, like always. The snow was deep, up to my calves, soft and untouched. That was what froze me for a moment. Untouched. The drift was smooth and unbroken all the way to the door, like a clean sheet. The problem was that I could see footprints on the small concrete pad just outside the back door. There were 2 clear boot prints pressed into the thin layer of powder on the concrete, right in front of the door, toes pointing in toward the house. They were not mine. The tread was different, and there were only 2 of them, close together, as if whoever had been standing there had appeared and then disappeared without taking another step. I stood there, my key half in the lock, staring at those 2 prints. The snow on either side was totally undisturbed. No path leading up to the porch, no retreating trail, nothing. My first thought was that they had to be old, maybe from before the last snowfall. and I just had not noticed. Maybe the wind had blown snow around them in some weird way. It was cold and dark, and the longer I stared, the more I felt the wind slicing through my coat. I told myself I was being ridiculous, unlocked the door, and went inside. The house felt as it always did. A little too quiet, a little too cold. I stomped off my boots, hung up my coat, and tried not to think about those prints. By the time I was curled up in the living room with a mug of tea, I had mostly convinced myself there was some reasonable explanation. The wind, maybe. The landlord, maybe. Anything but the obvious, uncomfortable possibility that someone had been standing right outside my door with no way in and no way out. That night, the house woke me up. I remembered the digital clock glowing 2:17 when I first opened my eyes. There was a sound, faint under the hum of the furnace and the distant hiss of the wind. At first, half asleep, I thought it was just the building settling. Then I heard it again. A soft, measured knock, not on my bedroom door, not on the front door. It sounded like it was coming from the back. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks again. I lay there, staring at the dark ceiling, my breath loud in my own ears, every instinct telling me to stay where I was. No one ever came to the house unannounced, and certainly not at 2 in the morning in the middle of a storm. The rational voice in my head tried to pipe up, offering a tree branch, ice falling, something not human. But it was a knock. Rhythmic, intentional. Finally, I forced myself out of bed, grabbed my phone, and padded down the hallway. The house felt different in the dark, smaller somehow, and closer. The sound came again just as I reached the kitchen, the same soft 3-beat pattern. I stopped, barely breathing. From where I was standing, I could see the outline of the mudroom door. The light above the sink was off, but there was a faint glow from the porch light filtering through the glass panel. There was no shadow on the glass, no movement, just the muted light and the pale suggestion of the yard beyond. I stood there and listened. Silence. I waited another full minute, then another. No more knocks, no more sounds. Eventually, feeling foolish and more annoyed than scared, I flipped on the kitchen light and walked to the mudroom door. The moment I did, the temperature hit me. The mudroom felt several degrees colder than the rest of the house, the air thin and sharp in my lungs. I could see my breath as a faint cloud. The back door itself was locked. I checked it twice, then peered through the small window. The porch light illuminated the concrete pad and a slice of the yard. The snow had piled higher against the steps, blown into sculpted drifts. There was nothing moving, no shape, no person, no animal. Only once again, those same 2 prints on the concrete, slightly deeper than before, the edges sharper, like they had been made more recently. I shut the door, turned the lock until it clicked, and backed away. I did not sleep much after that. The next day at work, I tried to laugh it off when I told Hannah about it over lunch. I left out the little detail about the prints seeming different. She already thought I had made a stupid decision moving out there, and I did not want to give her more ammunition. She told me I should keep my phone by the bed, maybe think about getting cameras. I told her I would be fine. I told her the landlord probably stopped by and did not realize how late it was. I told her anything that kept me from saying, "It feels like someone was outside my door in the middle of nowhere for no reason at all." 2 nights later, it got worse. The wind picked up that evening, rattling the windows in their frames. Snow was blowing almost sideways when I pulled into the driveway. I could barely make out the back of the house as I slogged through the drifts. This time, as soon as I stepped onto the concrete pad, I froze again. There were no footprints. The snow was dusted evenly across the concrete, smooth as powder. No sign of the 2 prints that had been there before. No sign of any disturbance at all. For some reason, that scared me more than seeing them again would have. It made the whole thing feel like my mind had invented it. Inside, I went through my normal evening routine. Dinner, dishes, a little TV. By 10, I was in bed, phone charging on the nightstand, a heavy silence pressed against the windows. I lay there, listening to the wind and the occasional groan of the furnace. At 2:11, like some malicious appointment, I woke up. This time, there were no knocks. There was something worse. I woke with the instant certainty that I was not alone. It is hard to explain that intuitive jolt, the way your body knows before your brain does. My eyes were open, and my ears were straining before I fully understood why. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The furnace was not running. The wind had died down to a distant whisper. From the direction of the kitchen, I heard the faintest sound of a latch shifting. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the subtle click of metal on metal, followed by the softest scrape, like a door easing against a swollen frame. I sat up, heart hammering, and stared at my bedroom door. The hall light was off as always, but a hint of the night outside touched the crack at the bottom. Nothing moved. The sound did not repeat. I told myself that it was the temperature. Old wood, old metal, everything expanding and contracting as the furnace cycled. I told myself that, even as I picked up my phone and opened the flashlight, even as I slipped out of bed and crossed the room on bare feet, every step feeling too loud. The hallway was empty. The kitchen was dark and still, counters, a collection of shadowed shapes. I hesitated at the edge of the room and listened. For a moment there was nothing, then faint and unmistakable I heard it. A slow dragging scrape from the mudroom. This time, I did not go in. I stood rooted to the spot, my hand on the light switch, and half whispered my own name just to prove I could still make sound. The scraping lasted maybe 3 seconds, then stopped. Seconds ticked by. I forced myself to flick on the light. The mudroom door was closed. I do not know why, but I was sure it had been open a moment before. I had a mental image of it standing slightly ajar in the dark, a crack of colder blackness beyond. But there it was, shut, the old white paint dull in the kitchen light. I walked over and placed my hand on the knob. It was freezing cold, colder than the metal elsewhere in the house. I swallowed, twisted it slowly, and opened the door. The cold hit me in a wave. The mudroom was like a meat locker, my breath condensing instantly. I swept the flashlight over the coats, the empty floor, the back door. The inside deadbolt was engaged. The door itself was closed tight. There was no one in the room. No one had tracked snow inside. The only thing out of place was the faint smell in the air, like damp earth and metal. My eyes went to the small window in the back door. Outside, the porch light shone down on the concrete pad, revealing a new set of prints. This time there were 4, arranged in a staggered pattern. They approached the door, stopped directly in front of it, and then nothing. No exit trail, no evidence of stepping away. The snow beyond them was unmarked. I backed away, shut the mudroom door, and locked it as if that would make any difference. I spent the rest of the night on the couch with all the lights on, pretending to watch television, jumping at every minor sound the house made. By morning, my nerves were raw, and my eyes felt like sand. That day, I called the landlord. I told him someone might be snooping around the property at night. He sounded baffled. He said there was no one out there, that the next property over was an older couple, and they kept to themselves. He offered to drop by and check the locks and talk about maybe installing a motion light in the back, but he was out of town for the week. I hung up feeling no better. That evening, I called Hannah and told her everything, this time without editing. She was quiet for a long time, then told me to pack a bag and come stay with her for a few days. I almost said yes. I almost listened, but stubbornness or stupidity or something else made me tell her I would be fine just one more night. I wanted proof. I wanted something I could point to, something that said, this is real, this is happening. I got my proof. Before bed, I pushed the kitchen table so it blocked the mudroom door. It was a stupid theatrical gesture, but it made me feel better. I checked the back door twice, making sure the deadbolt was set. I left the kitchen light on this time, and I slept with my bedroom door open a crack so I could see the faint glow down the hall. I woke up again, but not at 2. It was 3:03 when my eyes opened. For a moment, I thought I had beaten the house to it, Then I realized there was a sound already in progress, regular and soft and completely wrong. The table was moving. I can still hear it in my mind. The slow, gritty slide of wooden legs over old linoleum. A pause. Another drag. A pause. Over and over from the direction of the kitchen. I lay there, paralyzed, counting the seconds between each movement. Whoever was moving it was not in a hurry. It was the unhurried determination that terrified me the most. No banging, no shouting, just methodical pressure, like someone was testing how much resistance they were going to get. Eventually, the sound stopped. I did not get up right away. I lay there staring at the sliver of light in the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I finally swung my legs over the side of the bed, the floor seemed to tilt. My mouth was dry. I picked up my phone, opened the flashlight, and stepped out into the hall. The kitchen light was still on. The table was no longer in front of the mudroom door. It was riding up against the far wall, angled slightly, as if it had been pushed until one leg caught on the baseboard. One of the chairs was tipped on its side. The mudroom door stood wide open. I did not go any closer. I did not need to. From where I stood, I could see straight into the mudroom. The back door was closed. The deadbolt was set. And on the floor, just inside the threshold, were wet, melted shapes like water that had dripped from boots standing there too long. The air from the mudroom was so cold it made my teeth ache. Somewhere in that thin, freezing breath of air, I thought I saw the faintest hint of another exhale that was not mine, dissipating already. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and my coat without even stopping to put on proper clothes. I left the house with the lights burning in every room, the mudroom door open, the kitchen a mess. I did not look back at the porch. I did not check for prints in the snow. I drove to Hannah's place in the city and did not sleep at all. By the time the landlord went out to the house the next afternoon, the storm had filled in the yard again. He told me the doors were all locked, that there was no sign of forced entry, and no footprints near the back. He tried to tell me it was exhaustion, stress, maybe even a sleep problem. I let him talk. I let him keep my deposit. I never set foot in that house again. I still dream of it, though. I still dream of waking in the dark and hearing that soft, determined scrape of a table inching aside. Sometimes, in the dream, I get to the kitchen fast enough to see the mudroom door actually swinging open, slow and steady, as if pushed from the other side by something that does not care how long it has to wait, to whoever or whatever was standing in the snow outside that lonely farmhouse, pressing closer every night with no way in and no way out. Stay on your side of the door. The worst part of that night is how ordinary it felt at the start. I had driven that stretch of highway between Winnipeg and Brandon so many times that the route felt like a long, boring hallway. You never expect the hallway itself to turn on you. This happened 2 winters ago, in late January, on one of those nights when the sky is clear, the air hurts your lungs, and the snowbanks along the shoulders are tall enough to feel like walls. I had stayed late in Winnipeg, visiting family, and helping my sister with some stuff around her apartment. By the time I finally got back on the Trans-Canada to head home toward Brandon, it was just after 11 p.m. My dashboard thermometer read -20-something, and the highway looked almost abandoned. The occasional semi roared past, a couple of cars here and there, but for long stretches, it was just my headlights carving out a narrow tunnel of pale yellow in front of me, and black nothing beyond that. I was tired, but not dangerously tired. I had a thermos of coffee, a playlist going, and that familiar comfort of knowing every town, gas station, and rest stop along the way. I remember thinking that if I pushed the speed limit just a little, I would be in my own bed by 1 a.m. It started with headlights in my rearview mirror. About 20 minutes west of Portage-la-Prairie, I noticed a pair of lights cresting the dark behind me. At first, I did not think anything of it. Cars appear, cars pass you, cars disappear. That is just highway math. These lights gained on me steadily, until they were a comfortable distance behind, then stayed there. Not close enough to tailgate, not far enough to ignore, just locked into place. I told myself it was no big deal. Maybe they were doing the exact same speed. Maybe someone else was just trying to get home without drawing attention from the RCMP. I adjusted my mirror a bit because the glare was annoying and focused on the road. 10 minutes went by, then 20. The lights never changed position. If I accelerated slightly, they did too, always settling back into that same distance. If I eased off the gas a bit, they followed suit. It started to bother me in a way I could not explain. Most drivers drift, pass, or fall away. They do not sync up with you like they are tied on a rope. To shake it off, I turned up the music and took a few sips of coffee. Somewhere past a dark exit sign, I decided I was being paranoid. I told myself that I was projecting city instincts onto a mostly empty highway. Out here, you end up sharing space with strangers a bit longer. That was all. Then the lights disappeared. 1 second, they were there in the mirror, annoying my eyes. The next second, I checked again out of habit, and the mirror was dark. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a car pulling into the left lane to pass me, but there was nothing. No glow, no movement. Just the steady sweep of my own headlights and a black ribbon of highway behind. It was like someone had switched them off. There was nowhere obvious they could have turned. We were in the middle of a long, straight stretch with no visible intersecting roads, just snow and fields and the occasional distant clump of trees. The last exit was a while back. The next one was still ahead, marked by a sign I had not reached yet. Maybe they had pulled over and killed their lights. Maybe it was a mechanical issue. I tried to make it logical, but my stomach tightened anyway. 5 minutes later, that tightening turned to something else. I glanced ahead as a semi crested a slight hill in the distance, its lights huge and bright, and noticed something strange in the rear view at the same time. Faint at first, but there. Those same headlights, much farther back this time, flaring into existence like they had been turned on again. I watched the mirror more than I watched the road for the next few minutes. The semi passed me with a blast of wind, and once it was gone, it was just me and those slowly approaching lights again. Only now, I was sure. There was a deliberate pattern to it. They came just close enough to be noticed, then disappeared, then reappeared, always aligning with me again. To test it, I signaled and changed lanes for no reason. The highway was empty enough that it felt absurd, but I did it anyway. Within a minute, the lights shifted too, sliding into my lane instead of the other, still that same polite distance behind. Okay, I said out loud to no one. That is weird. The next town on the map was still a ways off, and the rest area I knew about was behind me. Pulling over on the side of the highway in the middle of the night with someone playing shadow games did not feel smart. Calling the police also felt premature. They had not done anything technically illegal yet. I told myself I would wait until the next gas station or lit intersection and then decide. That was when they finally made a move. Without warning, the lights surged forward. The car behind me accelerated hard, closing the gap in seconds. I tensed, expecting them to swing into the passing lane and roar by, but instead they moved right up onto my bumper. Not tapping me, not weaving, just sitting there. Too close now, flooding my interior with white light. My heart started hammering. I eased off the gas a little, hoping they would go around. They did not. I sped up a fraction, testing their response. They stayed glued. My hands tightened on the wheel. There was no one else visible ahead or behind. It was just me and this anonymous driver in the middle of nowhere. I fumbled for my phone in the cup holder, thinking about calling 911. Before I could, the lights behind me flicked off again. 1 second, I was driving in a wash of glare. The next, there was only the dark behind, my own headlights, and that sickening feeling that something was very wrong. I checked my speed. I checked the road. The car had not fallen back this time. It had simply vanished from my mirror. This was the moment my rational brain started to lose the argument. There was nowhere for them to go without me seeing some hint of it. The shoulders were piled high with snow. The ditch was deep. There were no turnoffs, no driveways, no lit markers. If they had pulled over and killed their lights again, it would mean they had deliberately waited for me to notice their presence and then their absence. I drove like that for maybe another 15 minutes, knuckles white, eyes flicking more to the mirror than ahead. Every set of distant lights made my chest tighten. When I finally saw the blue glow of a gas station sign on the horizon, it felt like spotting land from a lifeboat. The station sat at one of those small intersections. A few pumps, a convenience store, and a truck parked off to one side. The lot was mostly empty. I signaled early, took the exit, and pulled in, parking by the pumps closest to the door. My plan, if you could call it that, was simple. Get out, go inside, stay where there were cameras and people until I could shake the feeling or call for help. I turned off the engine. For a second, I just sat there, listening to the tick of cooling metal and my own breathing. The highway noise was a distant whisper. Then I saw them again. As I glanced back toward the road, a car turned off the highway and into the gas station lot. Same height, same light color, same slow, measured movement. It did not pull up to a pump. It did not park near the door. Instead, it rolled to a stop at the far end of the lot, in the darker area where the overhead lights did not quite reach. The headlights stayed on, pointed in my general direction but not directly at me. I could not see the driver through the glare. I could not see anything inside. The engine seemed to idle. A low hum I felt more than heard. I made a decision then. I grabbed my wallet and phone, opened the door, and walked briskly into the store without looking back. Inside, the fluorescent lights felt harsh and unreal. There was one older cashier behind the counter, and nobody else. I wandered the aisles for a minute, pretending to look at snacks, trying to get my breathing under control. When I finally stepped to the window to peek out, the car was still there, in the same spot, engine running, lights on. The cashier asked if I needed help. I hesitated, then told him that I thought a car had been following me for a while, and I was feeling weird about it. He frowned and came over to the window with me. Together, we watched the car. The driver did not get out, did not move, did not even turn their head that I could see. "Maybe you should call someone," the cashier said quietly, "or wait for another driver to show up and leave with them." I nodded, took out my phone, and, with hands that felt too big, dialed the non-emergency police line. While it rang, the headlights outside turned off. It was like someone had snapped their fingers. One instant, there was this bright, threatening presence. The next, only the dim outline of a car in the far corner of the lot, barely visible. By the time an operator answered and I started to stammer out what was happening, the engine noise cut off as well. The silhouette of the car shifted slightly. Then slowly, it rolled backward, turned, and eased back out onto the highway, its taillights flaring briefly red before becoming small and then vanishing into the dark. I stood there with the phone to my ear, feeling foolish and shaken and relieved all at once. I described what had happened anyway. The operator listened, took my location, and told me they would send a patrol car to sweep the area, but without a plate or a real description, there was not much they could do. No crime had been committed. They could have just been an aggressive driver, that was all. I bought a coffee I did not want and sat at one of the little tables near the window for a good half hour. A couple of trucks pulled in and out. Another car. The night started to feel normal again. Human. When I finally got back on the highway, it was close to 1 a.m. The rest of the drive was uneventful. No mysterious headlights, no disappearing cars. When I reached my place in Brandon and shut off the engine, the silence felt like a blanket. I told myself, as I locked the door behind me, that it was over. It would be easy to leave the story there. Weird driver, overactive imagination, no harm done. I almost managed to believe that version myself. Almost. A week later, while scrolling through local news on my phone during a lunch break, A headline caught my eye. It was about a woman who had gone missing after leaving Winnipeg late at night, last seen on the same stretch of highway I had been on. The article did not say much beyond that. Her car had been found abandoned on the shoulder. No signs of a struggle, no obvious mechanical issues. She'd just vanished. In the comments, people were arguing about whether she had run off, whether it was foul play, whether the cold had gotten her if she'd started walking. Buried among them was a shorter comment that made the hair on my neck stand up. Someone mentioned seeing a dark car with its lights off sitting way back on the shoulder, a few nights in a row on that same section, never near an exit, never with hazards on. I do not know if it was the same car. I do not know if any of it is connected, but every time I make that drive now, even in broad daylight, a part of me is counting headlights, watching mirrors, and keeping an imaginary tally of who pulls off where. The highway between cities is supposed to be empty and boring, just a long line you trace between one safe place and another. That night taught me that there are people who treat that emptiness as an opportunity. To whoever sat behind me on that frozen road, playing with distance and darkness like a game, I hope you enjoy the empty stretches. I will be taking the bus if I can help it. 3 summers ago, I learned there are some sounds you never want to hear coming off the lake at night. Growing up in Manitoba, you get used to quiet water and loons calling in the dark, to cabins that feel more like second homes than vacation spots. That is what our place near Lake Winnipeg always was to me. Familiar, safe, ordinary. It took exactly one off-season weekend to change that. It was late October, right after Thanksgiving. The tourist crowds were gone. Most of the other cabins were boarded up, and the little store near the highway had already switched to shortened hours. My parents had driven up earlier in the day to close the cabin for winter and asked if I wanted to tag along. I said yes, partly out of nostalgia, and partly because my friend Ellie was free and we thought one last chilly weekend by the water sounded cozy. We drove up together on Friday afternoon, the sky low and gray, the tree line mostly bare except for stubborn clumps of leaves. The lake itself looked flatter than I remembered, a huge slate-colored sheet stretching into the distance. The cabin sat back from the shore a bit, separated from the water by a narrow strip of rocky beach and a line of stunted trees. In summer, there was always noise, kids playing, boats, music. Now, as we unlocked the door and carried bags inside, it felt like the whole world had turned the volume down. The first few hours were normal. We turned on the baseboard heaters, aired out the place, helped my parents stack some wood, and checked the plumbing. By evening, they decided to drive back to Winnipeg to avoid icy roads in the morning. That had been the plan all along. They would head home, and Ellie and I would stay one night and lock up in the morning. As their taillights disappeared down the gravel road, I remember feeling a little buzz of excitement at having the cabin to ourselves for the first time. We made simple food, played cards, wrapped ourselves in blankets, and listened to the wind. Every so often, we would peek through the curtains and look at the lake. At night, it just looked like a darker kind of darkness, a horizontal strip of nothing beyond the faint suggestion of the beach. Around midnight, the wind died down. The cabin settled into that particular off-season quiet, the kind where you can hear every small creak and tick. Ellie fell asleep on the couch with a book over her face, and I ended up sitting at the small kitchen table by the back window, scrolling on my phone and finishing lukewarm tea. That was when I heard the first call. At first, I thought it was a loon. It came from somewhere out on the water, a long, rising sound that cut through the silence and seemed to hang in the air. But it did not sound quite right. Loons have that wild, echoing cry that everyone here recognizes immediately. This was flatter, a little strained, like someone doing an impression and not quite getting it. I froze and listened. The cabin was still. Ellie snored softly from the living room. The sound did not repeat. After a minute, I shrugged it off and told myself it was some other bird or the wind playing tricks. I went back to my phone. The second call came a few minutes later, and this time it was closer. Same drawn-out sound, almost a loon, but not quite. It seemed to come from near the shore, maybe just beyond the tree line, at the edge of the property. Something about the way it cut off at the end made the hair on my arm stand up. It was like whoever or whatever was making it did not know how to stop smoothly. I got up and went to the back window. From there, I could see a slice of the yard, the dark band of trees, and beyond that, a suggestion of movement where the lake met the shore. The outside light at the side of the cabin was off. We had never bothered to flip it on. I could not see much, just shadows, and a faint sheen where the water was catching what little light there was. "Ellie," I called quietly. "You awake?" She groaned and rolled over, mumbling something. I almost went in to shake her, to tell her to listen, but I hesitated. Waking your friend up to say you heard a weird bird in the dark sounds like a fast track to being made fun of. Instead, I stood at the window a while longer, trying to pick out any shapes moving against the dark. The third call came from directly behind the cabin. It was the same, almost loon sound, but closer now, and wrong in a way I felt in my chest. It came from the land side, not the water. Right after it faded, there was a second noise. A soft splash, like a heavy foot coming down in shallow water, followed by the crunch of gravel. I backed away from the window without meaning to. The layout of the cabin suddenly made me feel exposed. There were too many windows, too many thin layers of glass between us and outside. I went into the living room and shook Ellie's shoulder. "Hey, seriously, wake up." She blinked up at me, hair sticking up, eyes foggy. "What? Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" She sat up slowly, listening. For a moment, there was only the hum of the heater. Then, from the direction of the beach, we both heard footsteps. They came in sets. Crunch, 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 a pause, then more crunching. It sounded like someone walking very deliberately across the rocky shore, not hurrying, not stumbling, just pacing. The sound would move a little, stop, then start again. Whatever was out there was large enough that the rocks shifted under their weight. Ellie's eyes met mine. The sleepiness was gone. "Probably a deer," she whispered, though her tone did not match her words. "Deer do not make calls like that," I whispered back. As if on cue, the almost loon sound came again, this time so close it seemed to vibrate the glass. It echoed around the cabin in a way that made it hard to pinpoint the exact location. It did not sound like it was out on the water anymore. It sounded like it was between the trees and the shore, somewhere in that strip where the beach met the dark. Ellie grabbed the TV remote and muted the movie we had left running. The silence that followed felt heavy. We stood there together, listening. The footsteps shifted from the rocky beach to something softer. Instead of sharp crunches, there was a duller, muffled tread. That meant they were on the narrow strip of grass and dirt between the trees in the cabin. The side of the building that faced the water did not have many lights, just one bulb over the small back deck. We had not turned it on. It felt too late now. The idea of flipping it and illuminating whatever was out there made my hands sweat. "Should we look?" Ellie asked. "No," I said too quickly. "No. If it is an animal, we will just spook it. If it is not, I do not want it to see us." We backed farther into the room, away from the windows, and stood there, every sense straining. The steps came closer, then seemed to stop just shy of the cabin wall. For a long moment, nothing happened. I could hear my own heartbeat loud in my ears. Then something heavy brushed along the siding. It was a low, dragging sound, like a body or a hand sliding along the wooden boards as it moved around the corner. The cabin was small enough that wherever it was within arm's length of us, separated only by cheap materials and air. Ellie grabbed my wrist hard enough to hurt. We did not speak. We did not move. The scraping continued for a few seconds, then stopped beneath the kitchen window. There was a faint creak, the kind wood makes when weight presses against it. The glass did not rattle. It was somehow worse that it did not. The control in the movements made my skin crawl. For the first time that night, I regretted not having curtains thick enough to block out everything. The ones we had were thin, meant to keep the sun from fading the furniture, not for privacy. Standing there, I had the awful sense that if I took even one step closer, I would see a shape through the fabric. An outline of something pressed up against the pane, leaning in. The call came again, muffled now, as if made close to the wall. It cracked in the middle, dropping into a lower register for a second before pitching up again. It sounded less like an animal than it ever had, and more like a person trying to remember what a loon was supposed to sound like. That snapped something in both of us. Ellie whispered, "Basement." Even though the cabin technically did not have one. Just a small utility space under the bathroom. What she meant was bedroom door lock. We moved as quietly as we could, grabbing our phones, turning off lights as we went. The darkness inside the cabin thickened, but it felt better to be hidden. We shut ourselves in the back bedroom, the one farthest from the water, and locked the flimsy door. There was a small window, but it faced the driveway and the gravel road rather than the lake. From there, we could not hear the footsteps as clearly. Only every so often the call would drift in again, distorted by distance and walls. We sat on the floor between the bed and the wall, backs pressed to cold wood, and waited. Twice, something thumped lightly against the outside walls. Not hard enough to be an attack, just enough to say, "I am here." At some point, Ellie started quietly recording audio on her phone, thumb shaking. I set mine to do not disturb, except for my parents' numbers, and considered calling them, considered calling the police. But what would I say? "Hi, there is something outside our cabin making bad loon impressions." The sounds went on for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. Gradually, the footsteps moved away, back toward the shore. The calls grew softer, fainter, until finally there was only the low hiss of the wind and the faint slap of water against rock. We did not sleep much. I think we both drifted in and out, jerking awake at every creak. When morning finally came and the gray light seeped into the room, my first thought was that the whole thing had to have been some kind of shared nightmare, until we saw the tracks. The ground between the cabin and the beach was a mix of old snow patches, frozen dirt, and leaf litter. It held impressions well. Starting near the waterline and moving up toward the cabin was a trail of prints. They were not boot prints. They were not hooves. Each one was roughly the size of my hand, long and narrow, with an odd splayed shape at the front. They sunk deep, like whatever had made them was heavy. The prints stopped in a clear line directly below the kitchen window. There were no prints doubling back, no pattern of retreat. It was as if whatever had walked up from the lake had simply ceased to exist at that point. Ellie and I followed the trail back toward the water, our breath clouding the cold air. At the shoreline, right where the wet stones met the lake, the prints just disappeared. No drag marks, no sign of slipping or falling. It was like something had stepped out of the water, walked to the cabin, and then stepped back into the lake along an invisible path that left no return trace. Ellie checked the recording on her phone. The audio was mostly muffled heartbeat and breathing, but at one point, clear as anything, you could hear the false loon call. Hearing it in daylight on a small speaker made it worse somehow. You could hear the human edge to it, that slight delay before the sound cut, like someone guessing when to stop. We locked up the cabin in record time after that. When my parents called to check in, I told them everything. They tried to be rational about it. Maybe a moose, maybe some kind of deformed deer, maybe someone playing a prank from a neighboring property. But when they came up a week later to double-check the place before real winter set in, they called me with a quiet note in their voices. There were more prints, my dad said. Fresh ones, same shape, coming up from the lake and stopping at the trees. Nothing going back. I have not stayed at the cabin off-season since. In summer, with boats and laughter and campfire smoke, it is easy to pretend that night never happened. The loon calls blend together, and you stop picking apart every sound. But sometimes, just after sunset, when the lake goes still and a loon cries from somewhere out in the dim, I find myself listening too hard, waiting to hear if one of them falls just a little flat at the end, to whatever walked up out of the water to stand under our window and practice being something it was not, stay in the dark part of the lake. We are done sharing the shore with you. There are places where time feels like it works differently, and for about 3 weeks in the middle of winter 2 years ago, I lived in one of them. I still do not have an explanation. I have theories, anxieties, and a half-written journal full of timestamps that do not line up, but no answers. What I do have is the memory of walking the same street corner in a small northern Manitoba town and feeling the world fold in on itself just enough to notice. I had taken a short-term contract job in a town near Thompson. It was the kind of place that exists mostly to serve mines and logging operations, with a main street, a grocery store, a Tim Hortons, and not much else. The population hovered around 1,500, and in January, when I arrived, the sun barely made an effort. You had a few hours of pale gray light and then darkness by 4 in the afternoon. Most people I met were friendly in that reserved northern way, polite but not overly curious. I stayed in a small rental unit above a closed shop on the main drag, worked during the day, and in the evenings I would walk to the grocery store or the coffee shop to break up the isolation. Ruby, the woman who worked the evening shift at the grocery store, was one of the few people I talked to regularly. She was maybe 10 years older than me, wore her hair in a braid, and had this habit of counting items out loud as she scanned them, like a quiet rhythm. We fell into an easy acquaintance. She always asked how my day was. I always said, fine, and asked about hers. It was comfortable, predictable. The first time something felt off, I blamed the cold and the dark. I had left my apartment around 6 in the evening to grab milk and bread. The walk took me down the main street past a handful of closed storefronts to the grocery store at the far end. I remember checking my phone before I left. 6:03 p.m. The walk usually took me about 8 minutes. When I got to the store, the automatic doors slid open, and I stepped inside, grateful for the warmth and the fluorescent lighting. Ruby was at the register, same spot as always, sorting receipts. She glanced up and smiled. "Hey," she said. "Back again?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" She gave me a puzzled look. "You were just here like 20 minutes ago. Forgot something?" I laughed, confused. "No, I have not been here today yet." Ruby shrugged, her smile fading into something uncertain. "Weird." I could have sworn. She trailed off and went back to her receipts. I grabbed what I needed, paid, and left. On the way out, I checked my phone again. It was 6:14, the math worked. 8-minute walk, a couple of minutes inside, Ruby had just mixed me up with someone else, except there were not a lot of people in town who looked like me. I tried to let it go. For a couple of days, I did. Work kept me busy. The routine stayed the same. But then it happened again. This time, I was walking to the Tim Hortons in the late afternoon, just after 4. The light was already fading, the streetlights buzzing on one by one. I passed the corner where the hardware store sat dark and shuttered. There was a bench there, covered in snow, and a faded sign advertising long expired deals. I noted it without thinking, the way you note a landmark when you walk the same route too often. When I reached Tim Hortons, the girl at the counter greeted me with a tired smile and then paused. "You are back fast," she said. My stomach tightened. "Sorry, what?" "You were just in here." She glanced at the clock on the wall. "Like 15 minutes ago. Did you forget your order?" I stared at her. "I have not been here today." She frowned, clearly uncomfortable now. "Oh, my bad. Someone who looked just like you, I guess." I ordered, took my coffee, and sat at one of the plastic tables near the window. My hands were shaking slightly. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 4:19 p.m. I'd left my apartment at 4:10, I was sure of it. I looked at my recent activity, My step count, my location history, everything matched. I had walked from my place to here in under 10 minutes. No detours, no gaps, but someone had been here before me. Someone who looked enough like me to confuse a cashier. For the next few days, I started paying closer attention. I wrote down every time I left the apartment, every store I went to, the exact time I walked past certain landmarks. The hardware store corner became my checkpoint. I would note the position of the snow on the bench, the angle of the light, anything that could anchor me to a specific moment. That was when I started noticing Ruby. Not the Ruby at the grocery store, but another Ruby. Or the same Ruby in the wrong place. It was a Wednesday evening. I had just finished my shift and decided to take a walk down to the end of the main street past the grocery store just to stretch my legs before heading home. As I passed the side alley next to the closed gas station, I saw her. Ruby. She was standing near a dumpster, her back to me, wearing the same coat she always wore, her braid hanging down her back. I called out without thinking, "Ruby." She turned, and for a moment, I saw her face clearly. It was her. Same eyes, same expression, but she looked confused. Not surprised to see me, confused, like she was trying to remember something. Then she smiled, gave a small wave, and turned back around, walking deeper into the alley. I stood there for a second, unsure. It was strange but not impossible. Maybe she was taking out the trash. Maybe she was on a break. I kept walking. When I reached the grocery store, 5 minutes later, Ruby was behind the register scanning items for an older man. She looked up when I walked in and smiled. "Hey," she said. "Busy night." I stopped in the aisle, staring at her. "Were you just outside?" She blinked. "Outside? No, I have been here since 5. Why?" I could not answer. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I grabbed a bottle of water I did not need and left without paying close attention to anything else. That night, I could not sleep. I kept replaying the moment in the alley, Ruby's wave, her face, the way she had walked away without a word. The next morning, I checked my notes. I'd written down the time I passed the alley, 6:47 p.m. The time I entered the grocery store, 6:52 p.m. Unless Ruby had run from the alley, through some back route, changed her expression entirely, and gotten behind the register in 5 minutes, it did not make sense. After that, it kept happening. Not every day, but often enough that I stopped dismissing it. I would see someone I recognized in a place they should not be, and minutes later, I would see them again in the place they were supposed to be. A man from the hardware store walking past my apartment at night, even though I had just seen him locking up his shop. A kid I passed on the street appearing again at the far end of town seconds later when there was no way he could have gotten there that fast. And always, the corner by the hardware store felt like the center of it. Every time I passed that bench, that faded sign, I felt a small lurch in my chest, like stepping off a curb you did not see. One night, I decided to test it. I left my apartment at exactly 7 p.m. and walked to the corner. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the bench, the sign, the dark windows of the hardware store. Then I turned around and walked back to my apartment. I checked the time when I reached my door. 7:01 p.m. I had walked a block, stood still for a minute, and walked back. It should have taken at least 4 or 5 minutes. Instead, I'd lost time, or gained it, or never left at all. I tried again the next night, same route. This time, when I reached the corner, I saw myself. It was just a glimpse, just a second. A figure in a coat like mine, walking away from the bench toward the far end of the street. Same height, same walk. I called out, but the figure did not stop. By the time I reached the spot where I had seen it, there was no one there. When I got back to my apartment and checked my phone, the timestamp showed I had been gone for 12 minutes. My step count showed I had walked less than 200 steps. I finished my contract a week later and left town without saying much to anyone. I did not tell Ruby what I had seen, did not ask her if she remembered the alley. I just packed, drove south, and tried to forget the feeling of that corner. That strange, elastic sense of time bending just enough to let something slip through. I still think about it. I still wonder if other people noticed, or if I was the only one caught in whatever loop or glitch or fold existed in that town. Maybe it is still there, that intersection where minutes collapse and people walk past themselves without ever knowing. To the version of me that I saw walking away from that bench, I hope you found your way out. I am not sure I ever really did. Winnipeg looks different in a blizzard at night. Streets you have driven 100 times shrink into narrow tunnels between high snowbanks, and the world beyond your own windows might as well not exist. A few winters ago, during one of those heavy storms that made the news, I learned how dangerous that kind of isolation can really be. I was living alone in a small, older apartment block on the edge of the city, the kind of place with thin walls, a temperamental boiler, and an entryway that always smelled faintly of wet boots. It was early February, dead of winter. The forecast that week had been one storm warning after another, but Winnipeg people get used to that. You cannot shut your life down every time the weather threatens. That night, though, the storm actually delivered. By late afternoon, the wind was already high enough to rattle the windows, and snow was beginning to fall in thick, steady sheets. I finished my shift downtown, took one look at the buses trying not to slide through intersections, and decided to go straight home and not go out again until the city dug itself out. The building I lived in was 3 stories, maybe 12 units total, a mix of students, older tenants, and people like me somewhere in between. My neighbor upstairs, Ruben, was the only one I really knew. We would bump into each other in the stairwell, trade complaints about the heat, talk about the Jets. I liked knowing he was there, another pair of ears in case something ever went wrong. By the time I trudged from the bus stop to our front door, the snow was up to my shins and the world was turning into a white blur. The streetlights glowed in circles, the rest of the block nearly invisible. I stamped my boots on the mat, let myself in, and immediately heard the familiar clunk of the radiator kicking harder, the pipes in the walls knocking like something trapped inside them. Comforting noises, in their own way. The entry to the building was simple. A heavy outer door that opened into a small vestibule, then a second door with buzzers, and mailboxes that led to the stairwell. My unit was on the second floor right above the front doors. I kicked off my boots inside my place, microwaved some soup, and settled in for what I thought would be a quiet night of reading while the storm did its thing outside. The first strange thing happened around 8. I was on the couch when I heard footsteps in the stairwell. That was nothing unusual. People came and went at all hours, but these steps were different. They did not sound like someone climbing the stairs to their unit. They stopped right outside my door and stayed there. There was a soft shuffle, like weight shifting from one foot to the other. Then the slightest tap near the handle, like a finger testing it. I muted my phone and held my breath. The peephole on my door had never worked properly. Just a distorted fish-eye smear of color, so looking out was useless. After a few seconds, the steps retreated down the stairs. I let out a slow breath. Probably a delivery person double-checking the wrong door, I told myself. Or maybe one of my neighbor's friends who had miscounted floors. Weird, but not terrifying. Outside, the wind had picked up to a steady roar, occasionally punctuated by sharp gusts that made the whole building shiver. Snow scratched at the glass like sand. I could barely see the other side of the street now. Around 9:30, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, came back, dimmed again, then steadied. The hum of the fridge faltered, then resumed. In those few seconds, the apartment felt thinner, like the dark outside was pressing harder on the walls. I got up, dug a flashlight out of the drawer just in case, and left it on the coffee table. That was when I heard it. The front door downstairs opening, then slamming shut hard enough to shake the frame. The building doors were heavy and had those slow close arms on them. They almost never slammed. Curious more than frightened, I padded barefoot down the short hall to my own door and listened. The storm muffled everything, but I could make out the echo of boots on the tile below, then a pause, then the creak of the inner door. Whoever it was did not go up the stairs this time. The sound stopped in the entryway. I told myself it was just someone fighting with the wind and a stubborn latch. I tried to go back to the couch, but something about the stillness below bothered me. Usually, if someone came in out of the cold, you would hear them stomp, mutter, head for their unit. This silence felt wrong, like the building was holding its breath. After a full minute of nothing, there was a new sound. It started as a faint scraping directly beneath my feet, somewhere in the front hallway, almost lost under the wind. Then it grew louder. It was a dragging noise, slow and steady, like something heavy being pulled across tile. Scrape, pause, scrape. I imagined someone dragging a duffel bag or a piece of furniture. But who brings furniture in the middle of a blizzard at night, alone? As I listened, another detail emerged. The sound was not moving deeper into the building. It was moving back and forth across the small entry space from one side to the other, like whoever was down there could not decide where to go. After a few passes, the scraping stopped. For a moment, there was only the wind. Then came a light knocking on the inner door. It was not the urgent hammering of someone locked out. It was gentle, almost polite, a series of measured taps. It went on for a while, longer than anyone normal would bother. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. The rhythm made my skin crawl. I pictured someone standing in the vestibule, looking at the row of buzzers, deciding which one to press, and not pressing any. A buzzing sound cut through the tapping. Somewhere below, one of the intercoms crackled faintly, then went silent. Someone in another unit must have ignored it. The tapping continued. I stepped back from my door. Rationally, there was no reason to be afraid yet. Buildings like this collect odd behavior. Drunk neighbors, lost strangers, people seeking shelter from the cold. But something in the steadiness of that knocking felt off. It was too patient. After a while, it stopped. I waited, muscles tense, for another noise, but none came. Eventually, the radiators hissed louder, and the familiar domestic sounds of the apartment crept back into focus. I told myself that whatever weirdness had just happened was over. I was wrong. At around 11, after a couple of hours of half listening to the storm and half watching a show, there was a new sound outside my door. Not footsteps this time. It was quieter, like the slightest friction of fabric against metal. Then the whisper of something pressing, gently but insistently, on my doorknob. I killed the TV and sat motionless, staring at the door. The handle turned a millimeter, then another, then held. The deadbolt was engaged. Whoever was trying it was doing so slowly, carefully, as if not wanting to make noise. For a few seconds, the knob wiggled in tiny testing movements, up and down, side to side, like fingers feeling out the lock. Every instinct in me screamed not to make a sound. After a while, the pressure on the handle eased. I heard the faintest exhale on the other side of the wood, or maybe I imagined it. Then the floorboards in the hall creaked once, lightly, as if under a shifting weight. Whatever was there moved away, or at least stopped touching the door. That was enough for me. I grabbed my phone, texted Ruben, "You home?" The reply came almost instantly. "Yeah, why?" "Think someone is in the building messing with doors. You hear anything?" "Hold up," came back. Then, "Just looked. Hallway is empty." Relief washed over me, but only for a second. "Did you check the front?" I typed. "No way I'm going down there in this," he replied, "but I will listen." We both sat in our separate apartments, a thin slab of floor between us, sharing a silence that did not feel empty. After a minute or two, he texted again. "Wind is insane, but I thought I heard the front door a bit ago. You lock your deadbolt, yeah?" "Yeah," I wrote back in double. "Good. Try to sleep. People do weird stuff in storms." It was meant to be comforting. It was not. I left most of my lights on and dozed in fits on the couch, blankets wrapped around me. The storm outside rose to a constant roar, the kind where you cannot tell if that thump was snow sliding off a roof or something hitting the building. Every so often, I heard faint noises in the stairwell, soft footfalls, the scrape of something on the steps, a muffled cough. Each time, I would freeze until they faded. Sometime after 2 in the morning, I woke to a complete, oppressive quiet. The power had gone out. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the heating system, the faint buzz of electronics, all of it was gone. The apartment was black, the only light a dim gray from the window, reflecting snow outside. For a few disoriented seconds, I could not tell if my eyes were open or closed, and in that tense silence I heard slow, careful footsteps on the stairs. They were not the hurried steps of someone just trying to get inside from the cold. They were measured, almost delicate, each one placed with intention. Up from the ground floor to the first landing. Pause. Up to the second. The steps stopped right outside my door. Every muscle in my body locked. The flashlight was on the coffee table, an arm's length away that suddenly felt like miles. I did not dare move. I listened. There was a moment of nothing. Then a soft scraping very close to the keyhole, like metal brushing metal. A thin, probing sound, in and out, as if something were being slid into the lock and gently worked. Someone was trying to pick it. I swallowed so hard my throat hurt. Downstairs, no one would see this. Out in the street, the storm hid everything. Up here, it was just me, the door, and that tiny telling noise. It went on for an agonizing span of seconds, then stopped. The handle turned once, firmly. The deadbolt held. The handle twisted again, harder. Wood creaked. The person on the other side let out a small, frustrated exhalation that I heard as clearly as if they were standing next to me. Then, surprisingly, they knocked. 3 knocks. Calm, measured, like someone who had just tried the professional way and now wanted to switch to polite. They waited a few beats, then knocked again, a little louder. When I did not answer, they reached up and brushed at the peephole. I saw the faintest darkening of that distorted circle, a shadow pressed close to the other side of the door. We stayed like that for a long time, me frozen on the couch, them standing inches away with a piece of wood and steel between us. Finally, slowly, the pressure on the peephole eased. The floor creaked as they stepped back. The footsteps retreated down the hall, soft, unhurried. They did not go down the stairs right away. I heard them try another door somewhere farther along, the same careful testing of a handle, then another. At least 2 of my neighbors had not locked their deadbolts. I heard doors open, close, then silence. A long time passed before the steps finally went back down toward the entrance, swallowed by the storm noise as if they had never been there. The power did not come back until dawn. When it did, the radiators clanged to life, the fridge hummed, and the building sounded normal again. I did not sleep another second. In the daylight, everything felt ridiculous. Maybe I had imagined some of it. Maybe the lock noise was just the building shifting in the cold. Then I opened my door. There were faint, dirty smudges around the handle and peephole like marks left by gloves or unwashed hands. On the floor of the hall, right in front of my door, were a few small chips of metal, tiny curlings, as if something had scraped against the lock itself. Downstairs, in the vestibule, wet prints marred the tile. Not full boot prints, more like the vague outline of soaked fabric, as if someone had been standing there for a long time, dripping. Later that day, I ran into Reuben by the mailboxes. He looked tired. "Did you hear any of that last night?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah. Power went out, right? I thought I was losing it. Someone tried my door too. I almost opened it, but something felt off. We told the landlord. He shrugged, said storms bring out all kinds of folks looking for warmth. That is just how it is in this city. He promised to keep an eye on it, maybe think about a new lock for the front. A few weeks later, Word went around the block about a guy who had been picked up by police not far away, breaking into apartment buildings during storms to avoid being seen. He had a record. Assaults, break-ins, worse. He liked buildings like ours, they said. Older locks, fewer cameras, lots of noise outside to cover his work. No one could say for sure that he had been in our stairwell that night. There was no proof. But when I looked at my front door after that, the deadbolt felt thin as paper. I moved out that spring. Now, whenever the first big storm of the season hits, and the forecast warns everyone to stay inside, I listen to the wind and think about that gentle, patient knocking in the dark, and about the soft scrape of metal in my lock. To the person who walked our halls that night, testing doors while the city slept, and the world outside was erased by snow, stay on the other side of every threshold I ever have. The strangest thing about that night was how normal everything felt right up until it did not. It was early March, just after one of those late-season snowfalls that leave dirty piles at the edges of parking lots and a thin layer of ice on the shoulders of the highway. I was driving alone on a stretch of road outside Portage-la-Prairie, headed back toward Winnipeg after visiting a friend. The sky was clear, the stars sharp, and the kind of cold that creeps into your bones if you stand still too long hung over the fields. It was just after midnight. The highway was almost empty, just the odd semi groaning by and the distant pin pricks of farmyard lights off in the black. My high beams carved a pale tunnel ahead of me. I had a thermos of coffee, a true crime podcast playing low, and my phone in the console, screen face down. I remember thinking the road felt endless in that way only prairie highways can, a ribbon of asphalt laid straight across flat land. I first saw him at the edge of that tunnel of light. At first, he was just a shape standing on the shoulder a good distance ahead, on the right-hand side of the road. As I got closer, the beams picked out more detail. A man, tall and thin, wearing a dark coat that hung too loose on his frame. His head was bent slightly forward, hands at his sides. He was not moving, not walking, just standing there, facing the road. The sight made my stomach drop for a reason I could not immediately name. Hitchhikers are not exactly rare in Manitoba, especially near the highway, but there was something off about the way he stood. Most people waiting for a ride have a sign, a bag, a thumb out, some indication that they are looking for help. This man just watched the road like he was waiting for something specific. As my car approached, he lifted his head. The high beams washed his face out, turning it into a pale oval with shadows where his eyes should have been. Even from a distance, in those few seconds before I reached him, I had the strong, irrational feeling that his gaze locked directly onto mine through the glass. A shiver went down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I tightened my grip on the wheel and did what I had already decided to do. I did not slow down. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, passing him on the left, giving as much room as I safely could without drifting into the other lane. As my car drew level with him, a part of me wanted to take a quick look, to reassure myself that he was just some guy. I resisted it. I kept my eyes forward. Even so, I could not shake the sensation of him watching me as I flew past. In the mirror, for a heartbeat, I saw him as a dark shape shrinking in my taillights. He did not step toward the road, did not wave. He simply remained where he was, standing on the shoulder, until the curve of the highway swallowed him and he was gone. I exhaled slowly. Nope, I muttered to myself. Not tonight. To distract myself, I reached for my phone, tapped it awake, and called my friend Theo. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice thick with sleep. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah, sorry. I just needed to hear another human voice," I said, feeling foolish even as the words left my mouth. "There was a guy on the side of the road. Gave me the creeps." Theo grunted. "Do not pick anyone up. You know the stories. Get home. Go to bed. You're almost back, right?" "About 40 minutes, I said, glancing at the dashboard clock. "It is fine. Just my imagination." We chatted about nothing for a bit, Work, mutual friends, plans for the weekend. The conversation smoothed out the edges of my unease. Eventually, Theo yawned and said he was going back to sleep. We hung up, and the car felt quieter than before, the podcast narrator's voice somehow thinner against the empty dark. Another 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. I had almost convinced myself to forget about the hitchhiker when I saw a shape at the edge of my headlights again. Same side of the road, same hunched posture, same dark coat hanging too large. For a split second, my brain tried to tell me it was someone else. It could not possibly be the same man. I'd been driving at highway speed this whole time. But as I drew closer, the similarities clicked into place like puzzle pieces. The way he held his shoulders, the angle of his head, even the slight tilt of his stance like he was bracing against a wind that was not there. It was him. My heart lurched. I flicked my eyes down to check my speed. Steady, a little above the limit. Nothing that would allow someone on foot to leapfrog me. There had been no side roads, no towns, no driveways obvious enough for him to have reached the highway ahead of me again. As my car approached, he lifted his head once more. This time, fear won out over caution. I stole a glance as I passed. Just a brief, sideways flick of my eyes. Up close, his skin looked too pale in the headlights, stretched over sharp cheekbones. His hair was dark, slicked back against his skull. His eyes caught the light in a way that seemed wrong, like they reflected it without really absorbing it. His mouth was a thin line, not smiling, not frowning, just there. What unnerved me the most was his expression. It was not desperate or pleading the way you might expect from someone stranded on a cold road at night. It was expectant, calm, like he had known I was coming. I faced forward again, fingers numb on the steering wheel. "No way," I whispered. "No way." The rational explanations lined up and toppled just as quickly. I must have misjudged the distance the first time. Maybe there had been a parallel road and he had cut across. Maybe there were two men, dressed eerily similarly, spaced along the highway by coincidence, but another part of my brain, the old part that listens to instincts, whispered a different possibility. Do not stop. Do not look back. Just drive. My phone buzzed in the console, making me jump. I snatched it up without taking my eyes off the road. A new text from Theo lit the screen. "You home yet?" I tapped out. "Not yet. You are not going to believe this. Just saw the same guy on the road again," and hit send. The 3 dots appeared. Then, "Dude, there is no way. Are you sure?" Before I could answer, my headlights swept around a gentle curve and picked up another dark figure on the shoulder ahead. Same side, same coat, same stillness. This time, I did not even pretend to look away until the last second. I stared straight through the windshield as my car approached, every muscle rigid. He seemed closer to the lane now, a step nearer to the painted line, his head already lifted, as if he had been staring into the darkness, waiting for my light to find him. My pulse roared in my ears. Something in me cracked. As my car drew level, I slammed my palm against the horn and kept it there. The blast tore open the quiet, startling even me. In that split second, I flicked my gaze sideways again, unable to stop myself. He had not flinched, not even a little. No startle, no blink, no reflexive step back from the sudden noise. He simply stood there, eyes on me, or through me, expression unchanged. Up close, I noticed something else. His coat, though dark, hung on him like it was soaked, edges heavy and uneven, as if they had been dragged through water or snow repeatedly. Droplets caught the light along the hem and then vanished as I sped past. I tore my eyes forward, breath coming fast. The horn fell silent as my hand slipped. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. My phone buzzed again. "Everything okay?" From Theo. I did not answer right away. I needed both hands, both eyes, all my focus. The highway, moments ago just a long, dull line, felt like a tightrope. The darkness beyond the beams looked thicker. With each passing kilometer marker, I waited to see that shape appear again at the edge of the light. It did not. The next 20 minutes of road were empty. No more figures. No more strange repetitions. Just snowbanks, occasional signs, and the distant glow of Winnipeg growing brighter on the horizon. By the time I hit the city limits, I had half convinced myself that I had miscounted distances, that stress and isolation had played tricks on me. Theo called again just as I was turning off toward my neighborhood. "You good?" he asked, voice sharper this time. "I'm almost home," I said, forcing a laugh that sounded thin to my own ears. "I will tell you the whole thing tomorrow. It is probably nothing." "Video call me when you get in," he said. "Humor me." I promised I would. We hung up. The familiar streets of my area, small houses, parked cars, street lights, should have been comforting. Instead, every shadow looked a little too thick. Every parked car felt like it could have someone sitting silently inside. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a second, hands still on the wheel. The street was quiet, snowbanks dull gray under sodium lamps. No one was walking their dog. No late smokers on porches, just stillness. When I finally got out, the cold slapped me, sharp and real. I grabbed my bag, locked the car, and walked briskly to my front door. My breath puffed in front of me. The key stuck slightly in the lock before turning. The porch light flicked on as I opened the door, bathing the small entryway in yellow. I glanced once over my shoulder, more out of habit than anything. At the very end of the block, where the light from the last street lamp bled into the dark, a tall, thin shape stood on the sidewalk. Hands at its sides, head tilted just slightly forward. I blinked hard. The shape seemed to dissolve, resolving itself into nothing but the dark outline of a bare tree and a trick of the angle. That is what I tell myself anyway. I stepped inside and locked the door. Double-checked it. Triple-checked. Then I video-called Theo, held the phone up so he could see my living room, my face, my shaking hands. He cracked jokes until my breathing slowed, then finally let me go to bed. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize the whole thing away. Fatigue. Darkness. Maybe I had passed 3 different people, or 2, and my mind stitched them together into one impossible figure. I went back over that stretch of highway in daylight a week later. The shoulders were the same, the fields the same, nothing to mark where he had stood. What sticks with me the most is not the repetition itself, though. It is the way he never once looked surprised to see me. Each time he seemed to already know I would be there, standing exactly in the right place at the right time, like we were hitting cues in a script I had not agreed to. Now, whenever I drive long, empty roads at night, I keep my eyes straight ahead, and I do not stop for anyone, no matter how desperate they look. To whoever, or whatever, waited on that stretch of highway, always a little too far from any house or town, do not wait for me again. I'm not pulling over. Night shifts in downtown Winnipeg always felt a little unreal, like the city was holding its breath between one day and the next. For 2 years, I worked overnights as a clerk in an office building that pretended to be busier than it was. Tall glass, bright lobby, a security desk that no one really watched. What happened there one January still makes me second guess whether the worst things in that place were people, or something that used people like puppets. Back then, my job was simple. Answer calls that came in after hours, manage courier drop-offs, keep an eye on the doors, and make sure no one who was not supposed to be there got in. My domain was the ground floor, a lobby with high windows overlooking the street, a bank of elevators, and a small office off to the side where I sat with 2 monitors and a pot of coffee that never tasted right. Most nights were quiet. By 10 p.m., the last of the regular staff would trickle out, the lights on the upper floors would dim, and it would just be me, the cleaning crew, and occasionally the night security guard, a guy named Mia. She was friendly, calm in a way that made you feel like nothing bad could really happen on her watch. We would chat during her rounds and complain about the vending machines. It was boring, sure, but boring is good when you are alone in a big building after midnight. This started on a Tuesday that had already been long. A freezing rain warning had turned into an actual sheet of ice on the sidewalks. People had left early, wanting to beat the weather. By 9 p.m., the building was almost empty. The lobby felt colder than usual, the way big spaces do when there are too few bodies in them. Around 11, Mia came by my desk, rubbing her hands together. "Cameras are acting weird," she said. "Stairwell feeds keep flickering. If you see anything glitch, do not panic. IT said they would look at it tomorrow." I nodded, grateful for the warning, and watched her disappear into the elevator. On my side, monitors, the grid of security feeds showed mostly empty hallways and offices, the occasional motion from a cleaner pushing a cart. Every so often, one of the stairwell cameras would blink, going grainy for a moment before snapping back into clarity. The first odd thing happened just after midnight. I was half listening to a podcast and filling out a spreadsheet when I noticed movement on one of the top floor feeds. A figure stepped out of the stairwell into the corridor of the 14th floor. That would not have been strange. Some staff did work late, except the floor was supposedly cleared and locked down, and the cleaners were not scheduled to go up there that night. The figure moved slowly, walking away from the camera. The image was not sharp enough for me to make out their face, but I could see a dark coat, dark pants, a kind of purposeful walk. No cart, no vacuum, no sign of cleaning gear. They went past the first office door, then the second, then turned a corner and out of frame. I picked up the phone and buzzed upstairs, the generic extension we used for the cleaning staff. No answer. The clock on my monitor read 12:07. "Mia," I said into the radio. "You near 14, I thought that floor was closed tonight." Static. Then her voice, a little muffled. "I'm on 9. No one should be on 14. I will check it." I watched the screens as she boarded the elevator on 9 and rode up. The tiny timestamp jumped from floor to floor. When the doors opened on 14, she stepped into the same hallway where I had just seen the figure. It was empty. She walked down the corridor, her flashlight beam sweeping over doors, paused at the corner where the person had turned, then disappeared from one camera and appeared on the next. Nothing. No one. "Hallway is clear," she said over the radio. "Maybe a reflection or a delay in the feed. Cameras are glitching, remember?" I wanted to believe her. I said okay, thanked her, and tried to get back to my spreadsheet. But the image of that lone figure walking with such purpose down a supposedly empty hall stuck with me. Half an hour later, I saw them again. This time the feed was from the 11th floor. The same dark coat, the same steady pace, emerging from the stairwell into a different corridor. They did not pause, did not look around, just walked straight ahead toward the far end, where I knew there was a locked conference room. A cold, creeping feeling settled at the base of my spine. I checked the badge-in log on my computer. No one had badged onto 11 since 9:30 p.m. The only active badge in the building besides mine belonged to Mia. I pressed the radio button, tried to keep my voice level. "Mia, I am seeing someone on 11 now, same deal. Came out of the stairwell." She replied faster this time. "I am on 6, on my way up." On the screen, the figure reached the conference room door and stopped. For a moment, they stood there, not touching the handle, not doing anything, just standing. The camera glitched, fuzzing into static, and my heart jumped. When it cleared, the hall was empty. The elevator indicator on my console showed Mia's car climbing, 7, 8, 9, 11. The doors opened. She stepped out, turned into the corridor. Her flashlight beam hit the conference room door, lingered. No sign of anyone. "Nothing here," she said, but there was an edge to her voice now. "Are you sure you are not seeing old footage?" I checked the timestamp. It was current down to the second. "It is live," I said. I watched them walk in from the stairwell. The radios went quiet, except for the faint hiss of background noise. Mia made a slow circuit of the floor, checking doors, even peeking into the conference room. Empty chairs, dark windows, the city lights beyond. Finally, she sighed. "I will swing by the server room," she said. "Ask if they can reboot the camera system. Might be looping." She did not sound convinced. Neither was I. For a while after that, nothing happened. The feeds showed the same static images of empty workstations and darkened break rooms. I started to relax. Maybe it really was some kind of delayed playback, the system burping up old images. The human brain loves patterns. Maybe I was stitching a narrative into random glitches. It was almost 2 a.m. when everything tipped. I was staring at my monitor, zoned out, when movement on the lobby camera snapped me back. There, just outside the glass doors, stood the same figure. Dark coat, hands at their sides, head tilted slightly forward, looking in. My first thought was that they must have slipped past my notice and come down in the elevator. But the elevator had not moved. The screen showing the ground floor interior was empty, and there had been no door chime. Yet the external camera clearly showed someone standing on the sidewalk inches from the glass, facing the lobby. The street outside was nearly deserted. A thin crust of ice glittered on the pavement. I could not see their face clearly. The angle and the glare off the glass blurred it, but I could feel their attention. As irrational as that sounds, they were looking not at the front desk, not at the elevators, but directly where I sat, hidden behind tinted glass and a reflection of my own monitors. I froze, one hand halfway to the phone. The building doors were locked at that hour. To get in, you either needed a badge or to be buzzed in. Whoever this was had neither. They simply stood there, still as a photograph. "Can I help you?" I almost said out loud, out of habit, before remembering there was no speaker connected to the exterior door camera. Instead, I picked up the actual phone and dialed the security extension. "Mia," I said, as soon as she answered. "Someone is at the front door." "I am in the basement checking wiring," she replied. "No one should be trying to get in now. What do they want?" "I do not know," I said. "They're just standing there. Can you come up?" "On my way." I put the phone down and looked back at the screen. The sidewalk was empty. The figure was gone. No retreating back, no blur of motion. One frame they were there, the next they were not. The streetlights glowed over bare concrete, a dusting of ice, a smear of shadow from a traffic sign. That was all. I stood up without remembering deciding to. The lobby suddenly felt too big. The distance between my little office and the front doors like open ground. I told myself not to be ridiculous. Cameras fail. People drift in and out of frame. There were a dozen explanations better than something impossible just looked right at me. The elevator dinged. I jumped, then laughed nervously at myself as Mia stepped out. Radio on her shoulder, keys jangling. She looked at me through the glass, eyebrows raised, then scanned the front doors. "No one there," she said, walking toward them anyway. She checked the lock, peered out onto the sidewalk, even stepped outside for a second, breath clouding in the cold. When she came back in, she was frowning. "Street is empty," she said. "No cars, no pedestrians. Where exactly did you see them?" I pointed to the spot on the monitor, swallowing. "Right there, close enough to fog the glass if they breathed on it." She glanced from the monitor to the doors and back again, then shrugged like she wanted to throw the whole thing off her shoulders. "Long night," she said. "Your eyes play tricks on you, especially with these cameras flickering. I will log it. You sure you're okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired." She went back to her rounds. I sat down, heart still beating too fast. To steady myself, I minimized the camera grid and opened an email draft, intending to write IT a detailed list of the glitches so I would not chicken out and downplay it in the morning. My fingers hovered over the keys. In the reflection on my darkened monitor, I saw someone walk past the office doorway behind me. I whipped around so fast my chair squeaked. The hallway beyond the glass door to my little office was empty, lights humming, walls blank, no movement. From where I sat, I could see all the way to the elevators. No one. I turned back to the monitor slowly. The reflection, now a double image of my own face in the office, showed nothing but me. That was the moment something shifted in my head. Up until then, I could file things under maybe and probably just. Now, I had seen something where nothing was, in a room I knew every inch of. Whether it was stress, exhaustion, or something else, I could not trust my senses anymore. The rest of the shift crawled. I stopped watching the cameras unless I had to because every flicker made my stomach clench. At one point, around 3, I heard the stairwell door on our floor open and close, footsteps crossing the tile outside the lobby, then nothing. No one came into view, no one badged out. The sound came, stopped, dissolved into the hum of the building. When dawn finally lightened the sky and the first early employees shuffled in, shrugging off their coats and blowing on their hands, I felt like I had crossed 100 miles. The building felt different, with more people in it. No less labyrinthine, but less hungry. I stayed late to talk to IT and our manager. I described the figure, the floors, the lobby, the reflection. I tried to keep my voice steady, tried not to sound like I'd lost it. They listened, nodded, promised to pull the overnight camera footage and take a look. A week later, I asked IT what they had found. "Nothing useful," one of them said, scrolling through a directory. "Some glitches, some static, a few chunks where the feed must have dropped. No clear image of anyone where they shouldn't be. Honestly, it mostly looks like the cameras froze, then jumped. You know how old this system is. So, you did not see anyone on 14, or 11, or outside?" I pressed. He shook his head. If they were there, the system did not catch them. Or it did, and then ate it. He thought he was being funny. I did not laugh. I kept working nights for another month. Every shift, the building felt a little more hostile, like there was a second set of routines running underneath the normal ones, just out of sight. I started catching glimpses in the corner of my eye. Someone stepping into a stairwell just as I turned. A shadow at the end of a hallway that dissolved when I blinked. It got to the point where I could not tell if I was seeing things that were really there, or if I was writing ghosts into every grainy pixel. I quit a few weeks later, officially because I found a job with better hours. Now, when I pass that building on a bright afternoon, I look up at the dark bands of windows and wonder what is walking those hallways when most of the lights are off. Whether it was a real intruder, a system glitch, or something else entirely. Something up there moved with the certainty of a person who knew the layout better than we did. To whatever walked those empty floors that night, showing up where no one should be and then slipping just out of frame. Stay off any floor I ever have to work on again. The first time I flew into that northern community, I remember thinking it looked like somebody had dropped a handful of houses onto the edge of nowhere and then walked away. A few clusters of buildings, a school, a band office, a nursing station, and beyond that, trees and rock and frozen water, as far as you could see. I had taken a short-term contract up there, filling in at the health center for 6 weeks. By the end of the first month, I knew I had stepped into a place where people measured time less by the calendar and more by who had gone missing and when. On paper, it was simple. Fly in only, winter road open maybe a couple of months if the weather cooperated. In reality, it meant once the plane left, that was it. Whoever was in the community was who you had. No surprise visitors, no easy escapes. The first few nights, the silence after the plane's roar faded was almost comforting. Then it started to feel like a lid snapping shut. I stayed in a small staff house with 2 other workers. My closest friend up there was one of the local guys, Callum. He was a few years younger than me, quiet at first, but quick to laugh when he trusted you. He worked odd jobs around the community, helping in the school, doing maintenance for the band office, sometimes driving for the nursing station if they needed someone they knew. He knew everyone, and everyone knew him. We fell into a routine. I would finish at the clinic, and if he was free, we would meet up for coffee at his aunt's place, or sit on the steps of the school if the wind was not cutting too hard. He pointed out old trap lines, told me which dogs not to go near, which trails you did not walk alone after dark. Some things he laughed about, some things he did not. One night in late February, he walked me most of the way back to the staff house, on a path that cut behind the band office. "Stay off this trail if no one is with you," he said, serious in a way I had not seen before. "Especially late. People get turned around." "It is a straight line," I said, stamping my boots. "From there to here." He just shrugged. "Still, do not." I listened. Mostly. Until the night he disappeared. It was a Monday. The kind of cold that made the snow squeak under your boots like styrofoam. The sky was clear, and the stars looked close enough to touch. I remember because I kept looking up while walking home from the health center, breath clouding the air. It was just after 9. Most of the kids were inside, lights glowing from windows, the occasional bark or shout puncturing the quiet. My phone pinged in my pocket. A text from Callum. "You still up at the clinic?" "Just left," I replied. "Why?" "Need to talk to you. At my aunt's. Come by if you're not too tired." I hesitated. I was tired. It had been a long day of minor emergencies and one bad asthma attack. But I also knew that when someone in a place like that said they needed to talk, you did not brush it off. "Be there in 10, I sent. His aunt's house was on the far side of the band office, near the start of the trail he had warned me about. I cut through the packed-down snowpath, the building looming dark to my right. A single light burned in the school across the way. As I approached his aunt's, I could see someone moving in the front room, a shadow crossing the window. I knocked, stomping my boots. His aunt opened the door, warmth and the smell of stew spilling out. "He's not here," she said, frowning. "Thought he was with you." "He texted me from here," I said, holding up my phone. She shook her head. "No. He left maybe an hour ago. Said he was just going to walk, clear his head." Something in her face made me not push it further. I apologized, stepped back into the cold, and checked my phone again. The timestamp on his message said 9:02. It was now 9:15. I texted him, "Where are you then?" No answer. I waited a minute. Typed again, "You okay?" Still nothing. I told myself reception could be spotty, that maybe he had gone home and left his phone on his aunt's table. But his aunt's unease clung to me like the cold. Instead of heading straight back to the staff house, I took the longer route that looped past his place, a squat blue house near the tree line. No lights were on, no movement. A dog tied up out front lifted its head and whined softly as I passed. By the time I got to my own door, my fingers were numb from being out of my mitts too long, texting and rechecking. Still no reply. I told my coworkers I was going to try calling, retreated to my small room and hid his name in my contacts. It rang 5 times, then went to voicemail. I hung up without leaving a message, then called again. Same thing. On the 3rd try, it did not even ring, just went straight to voicemail. Out here, that usually meant the phone had died or gone out of range, but there was nowhere to go out of range. Not really. The towers that served the community were either on or not. I lay awake longer than I meant to, listening to the house creak as it cooled. At some point, I drifted off. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of voices outside. People were clustered near the band office, breath steaming, parkas zipped to their chins. I pulled on boots and joined them. The air felt different, thicker, buzzing with something unspoken. "What is going on?" I asked one of the nurses. "Callum did not go home last night," she said quietly. "His aunt said he left and did not come back. No one has seen him since." The band office organized a quick search, people fanning out along the obvious paths, to the school, the store, down toward the water, up toward the edge of the bush. Snowmobiles revved to life. Kids were sent back inside. Someone asked me if he had said anything strange to me at the clinic. I told them about the text, about going to his aunt's and finding him, already gone. "Maybe he crashed at a friend's," someone said without conviction. By midday, they were checking cabins, sheds, old trucks half buried in snow. I joined a group that swept the trail behind the band office, the one he had told me to avoid when I first arrived. The snow on the trail was disturbed by fresh prints. Many of them were from that morning's searchers, heavy boots and sled tracks. But under those, if you looked closely, there was an older set from the previous night, lighter, a familiar pattern. Callum's. They led from the road behind his aunt's house onto the trail, heading away from the core of the community and toward the darker line of trees. The last clear impression showed the ball of the foot deeper than the heel, like he had been leaning forward, walking with purpose. Then, a dozen steps in, the tracks simply stopped. Not faded. Not blown over. Stopped. People stood there, stamping their feet, staring at the blank unmarked snow ahead. A few meters further, fresh prints from that morning crisscrossed, overlapping each other. But in that small patch, where his prints should have continued, there was nothing. Wind, someone muttered. Drift must have filled them in. But the snow near the trail looked settled, undisturbed by the kind of gusts that erased tracks. The trees there broke the worst of it. Even so, no one said anything louder. They just turned and kept searching outward, eyes on the ground. Days passed. The official search teams came, talked to everyone, asked the same questions in slightly different ways. When did you last see him? Had he mentioned going anywhere? Did he seem upset, high, drunk, different? His phone, they said, had last pinged off the local tower around 9 p.m., somewhere near the band office. After that, nothing. It had not connected to any other tower. It had not been turned back on. At night, in the staff house, the three of us would sit around the small kitchen table, cups of tea cooling in front of us, replaying everything that had happened. You worked with him the most, one of the nurses said to me one evening. Did he ever talk about leaving, about going south? He joked about it, I said, like everyone does, but he loved it here. His family is here. Sometimes that does not matter, she said, looking into her mug. People go anyway. The thing was, if he had gone, there was nowhere for him to go that would not have left a trace. His winter stuff was still at his place. His jacket was gone, but his heavier parka hung on a hook. His boots were missing, but his good mitts were on the table. His ID, his bank card, cash, everything you would take if you meant to travel, sat in a little dish by the door. His aunt swore up and down he had left her house with no bag, no plan. Just a strange, faraway look and a quick, "I'm just going for a walk." Rumors started, like they always do. Some people said he had gone through. The ice near the river missed in the first sweep. Others whispered he had gotten into a truck on the winter road, hitched a ride somewhere he did not want to be found. A few older voices said less concrete things. They reminded each other in low tones about other names, other winters, other people who had stepped off solid ground and not come back. 2 weeks later, I was in the nursing station alone, finishing up charting, when my phone buzzed. One new message. No name on the screen, just an unknown number with a local area code. It contained a single photo. At first, it was just a blur of white and gray. Then I realized it was a shot of the trail behind the band office, taken from low to the ground, like the camera was held at waist height or a little lower. Trees on either side. The faint outline of the band office roof in the distance. Fresh snow, unmarred. In the corner of the frame, near where the photographer's feet would be, there were prints. A few clear ones, heel and toe pointing toward the trees. The timestamp said it had been taken the night Callum disappeared, about 10 minutes after his last text to me. My throat went dry. I checked the number again, tried to call it. It rang once, then cut off. When I tried again, it went straight to a generic, "This number is not in service" recording. I showed the nurse in charge the photo. We brought it to the band office, to the RCMP detachment. They copied it, logged it. They asked me if I was sure it had not come in earlier, and I had just noticed it late. I shook my head. I knew what time my phone had buzzed. I'd been writing notes. The sound had jolted me. "Could be a spoofed number," one of the officers said. "Someone messing around." "With what?" I asked. "Evidence from the night he went missing." No one had an answer that made sense. Spring came. The winter road melted. The plane rotations changed. I finished my contract and flew back south, the community shrinking beneath the wing until it was just a pattern of dots against the endless white and green. On my last day, his aunt hugged me tight and said if I ever heard anything at all, I had to call. I check the news from up there more than I used to. Sometimes there are updates on other cases. Sometimes there is nothing for months. Callum's name pops up less and less as the years go by, buried under new stories, new losses. Every so often, usually at night, that unknown number pings my mind like a phantom notification. I still have the photo, backed up in 3 different places. That thin little slice of a moment where there were clear prints and then none. A person walking into a space that did not record them leaving. I do not know what happened to him. I have to say that out loud sometimes because it is tempting to stitch one of the rumors into the blank. Runaway, accident, foul play, something else. None of them sit right. What I do know is that in places like that, the land holds its own stories, older than any of us. Some of them take people into themselves and do not give them back. To whatever walked with Callum that night, down that straight trail that somehow still made him turned around, I hope you are done taking names from that community for a long time. The first time I noticed him, I told myself it was just suburban paranoia. This was 2 years ago, late autumn, on a quiet street at the edge of Brandon where the houses all looked vaguely the same and people left their Halloween decorations up until the first real snow. I had moved in that September, happy to finally have my own place instead of another basement suite. The street felt safe, in the way cul-de-sacs and trimmed hedges trick you into believing nothing truly bad can happen there. My unit was the bottom half of a small duplex. A young couple lived upstairs. We got along well enough to exchange hellos and the occasional borrowed spice. Across the street, directly opposite my living room window, was another 2-story with pale siding and a sagging front step. He lived there, in the downstairs suite. I learned his name from the mail that sometimes ended up in my box, Freya. The first few weeks, I barely registered him. I worked long shifts, came home tired, and mostly noticed people only as moving shapes in the corner of my eye. Sometimes, as I pulled into my driveway, I would see Freya sitting on his front step, cigarette glowing between his fingers staring out at the street. It was easy to file him under neighbor who smokes too much and needs hobbies. Then little things started to pile up. One evening in October, I was in my living room, curtains half drawn, folding laundry, while the TV murmured in the background. Out of habit, I glanced toward the window. Through the thin gap where the fabric did not meet, I saw him standing on his side of the street, directly opposite my house, not on his own walkway, but on the sidewalk, turned toward my window. He was not smoking, he was not walking a dog, checking his phone, or heading somewhere. He was just standing there, hands in his jacket pockets, face tilted slightly up toward my living room. My first instinct was to move, to step out of sight. But curiosity pinned me in place. I watched him through that narrow crack in the curtains for a full minute. He did not shift or look around. Finally, a car turned onto the street, its headlights sweeping over him. He looked away then, lowering his head, and slowly walked back to his own front step like nothing was strange. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe he had spaced out facing my direction. Maybe he was watching a bird or a plane I could not see. Streets are shared, I told myself. People stand where they want. Still, that night, I closed the curtains all the way. After that, I started noticing him more. Not because he did anything dramatic, but because he always seemed to be there when I stepped outside. If I took my garbage to the back lane, I would hear a door close across the street and glimpse him out of the corner of my eye, heading to his car or pretending to check his mailbox. If I left for work early, he would be at his window, the blinds tilted just enough that I could feel his eyes on me. Once, in November, I came home after dark and fumbled with my keys under the weak porch light. The snow had that thin first layer look, patchy and slick. Something made me glance sideways. He was on his front step again. No coat despite the cold, arms crossed over a hoodie, watching. "Hey," he called softly. Not friendly exactly, but not rude. I forced a smile. "Hey, you're the new one, right? Been seeing you around." "Yeah," I said, keys finally finding the lock. "Just moved in September." He nodded like I had confirmed something he already knew. "It is a good street," he said. "Quiet. You can hear everything." I did not like the way he said that. Not hear everyone, but everything. I mumbled something non-committal and slipped inside, locking the door with a little more force than usual. I told myself I was overreacting. That one offhand comment from a neighbor did not mean anything. But over the next few weeks, he proved me wrong. It started with the cans. One morning, heading out to work, I noticed a crushed energy drink can on the grass by my front step. I picked it up, annoyed, and tossed it in the blue bin. The next day, there were 2 more. Same brand, same size, same flavor printed on the side. I did not drink that particular kind. I had seen Freya with one often enough, the silver and green catching light as he smoked. At first, I assumed they had blown there from somewhere else, but they always ended up in the same spot, a little to the left of my door, near the small flower bed. And it kept happening. 1 can, 2 cans, 3. Every other day or so, new ones would appear, always when there had been no strong wind, no garbage day to scatter things around. I started watching more carefully. One night, pretending to fuss with my phone near the front window, I saw him cross the street, empty-handed. He crouched near my front yard, his body blocking whatever he was doing. When he straightened and walked back to his side, there was a new can on my grass. I stared at it through the glass. Of all the unsettling things that had happened so far, that small, petty act hit me harder than it should have. It was not random littering, it was placement. A message that did not use words. After that, the knocking started. The first time, it was just after midnight. I was in bed, half asleep, when 3 soft taps sounded on my front door. Not the aggressive pounding of someone in distress, just a polite, almost hesitant knocking. My whole body tensed. I live alone. No one visits unannounced at that hour with good news. I stayed in bed, heart rate climbing, listening. After a moment, the knocking came again. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. I slid my phone off the nightstand and checked the screen. No missed calls. No messages. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That someone was knocking. By the time anyone arrived, it would be over. The taps repeated twice more, then stopped. I lay there in the dark for a long time, every creak of the house amplified, until sleep finally dragged me under. In the morning, I checked the front step. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, a soft dusting. There were footprints on my path, 1 set coming up to my door, no matching set leaving. The prints were deep. The tread pattern burned into the snow clearly enough that I could have matched it to a specific boot if I tried. They faced my door, toes inches from the welcome mat, then simply ended. On the street, across the way, the snow in front of Freya's unit was trampled, a knot of prints near his steps where he always paced to smoke. It did not prove anything, but when I glanced up, he was at his window, blinds parted just enough for me to see the outline of his face. The second our eyes met, the slats snapped shut. That day at work, I found myself retelling the story to my coworker, trying to make it sound funny. "My neighbor is weird," I said. "He litters in my yard and watches me like a hobby." She did not laugh. "Trust your gut," she said. "If he creeps you out, that is enough." I told myself I would start documenting things just in case. Dates, times, weird behaviors, but the days blurred. Some nights were peaceful. I saw nothing of him at all. Others, I would catch a glimpse through the curtain of him standing just outside his own door, not smoking, just listening. Head tilted like he was trying to catch a particular sound. The worst night came in December. Snowbanks were high by then, the street narrowed by packed drifts. The air had that muffled quality of deep winter. It was just after 2 a.m. when I woke, heart already pounding, with the distinct feeling that something had dragged me out of sleep. At first, I could not place what it was. The house was quiet. No knocking, no scraping. Then I heard it. The faint click of my gate latch. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. The gate closed again with a soft clack. Footsteps crunched on the frozen path leading to my front door, slow and deliberate. They stopped right outside my bedroom wall. My bed was against the interior side of that wall. Only a few inches of drywall and insulation separated my head from whoever stood outside. For a long moment, there was no movement, no sound, just the awareness of a presence on the other side of the wood. Then, from somewhere close to the siding, I heard breathing. Faint, but there. A slow inhale, a slower exhale, like someone standing very still in the cold, their breath just shy of frosting the wall. I could hear nothing else. No fumbling with the door, no knocking, no speech. Just that quiet, measured breathing, as if they could see through the wall and were simply listening back. Adrenaline flooded me. I wanted to reach for my phone, but the idea of any movement, any glow of light at the window felt like an invitation. Instead, I lay there, muscles locked, and counted my own breaths to drown. Out the other. Eventually, the breathing stopped. Footsteps retreated down the path. The gate latch clicked again, then silence. When the sun rose, I went outside to look. The snow on the path was churned up with prints, overlapping but clearly made by the same boots I had seen before. They led from the gate to my front door, then around the corner of the house to the spot directly under my bedroom window. From there, they went back to the gate and out to the sidewalk. Across the street, Freya was scraping ice off his car windshield. I stood there, bundled in my coat, pulse still too fast, and watched him for a second too long. He paused mid-scrape, turned, and gave me a little salute with the back of his hand. "Cold one," he called. "Yeah," I said, voice tight. "Cold." After that, I started taking precautions. I installed a cheap camera above my front door, visible enough that you would have to be oblivious not to notice it. I kept my curtains closed most of the time. I changed my routine. Different times for leaving, for taking out the trash. I wanted him to know, if he was paying attention, that I was not asleep at the wheel of my own life. The camera helped. For a while, the nighttime visits stopped. Or at least, the obvious ones did. I would still sometimes catch a shadow on the street when I glanced through the peephole, but no more direct knocking. No more quiet breathing at the wall. Then, one Sunday afternoon in January, the upstairs couple knocked on my door. "Have you seen this?" the woman asked, handing me her phone. A local news article filled the screen. The headline made my stomach turn. A man had been arrested a few blocks away after allegedly breaking into a woman's house in the middle of the night and standing over her bed without touching her. According to the story, he had a history. Prior charges for stalking, trespassing, voyeurism. His mugshot sat under the text. Pale, thin-lipped, dark hair. A familiar flat gaze. It was Freya. The details trickled out over the next few days. He had been watching that other woman's house for weeks, maybe months. Small things at first, then escalating. He had worked up to letting himself in with a copied key when she was out. He had moved items slightly, left small things behind, just to know he could. I thought of the cans, the footprints, the breathing at my wall. The police came around our block not long after, asking if anyone had seen anything, if anyone had cameras pointed at the street. I showed them a few clips of him, pacing at odd hours, lingering at the edge of my yard. They took notes, nodded, said variations of, "You did the right thing," even though I had never called them before this. They told me, almost offhand, that when they searched his place, they had found more than they expected. A notebook, they said, full of observations. Times, dates, descriptions of neighbors' routines. Next to some names, there were little symbols, asterisks, check marks, question marks. "Your name is in there," one of them said quietly. "It looks like he had been watching you for a while, but there is no indication he ever got inside your place." I swallowed hard. "Yet," I said. He did not argue. I moved out before his case even made it to court. I could not sleep in that bedroom anymore without imagining breath on the other side of the wall, without replaying every night I had spent thinking I was alone. People like to think that danger wears a clear mask, that you can spot it immediately. But sometimes it sits on a front step smoking, or stands on a sidewalk pretending to watch cars, or leaves trash in your yard like a dog marking a fence. To Freya, who turned a quiet street into a private viewing gallery, I hope every wall you see from now on is solid steel, and every window looks out on nothing at all. The camp looked harmless in daylight. It always did. A ring of old wooden buildings around a clearing, the long dining hall with peeling paint, the flagpole that creaked in the wind, the narrow trail that led down to the tree-lined river. If you drove past on a summer afternoon when the place was full, you would see kids running around, counselors in bright t-shirts, the kind of scene people put on brochures. But this was September, off-season, and the night we went back there was the first time I really understood why the older staff called it the Hollow. I had worked at that Manitoba camp for 3 summers in a row during university. By the end, I could walk it with my eyes closed. The cabins, the fire pit, the canoe racks by the water. My friend Oliver had been there even longer, eventually aging up into the kind of counselor everyone trusted automatically. He knew every story, every prank, every whispered legend that got passed down to scare homesick 12-year-olds. One of those legends was about Cabin 5. Officially, it was just another bunk near the tree line, set a little farther back than the others. Unofficially, it was the one counselors joked about in low voices around the fire after campers went to bed. The cabin where things went missing in odd ways, where kids woke up swearing they had heard someone breathing under their bed, where a boy had supposedly walked out sleepwalking years ago and almost ended up in the river before someone caught him. The camp director always waved it off. Old wood and overactive imaginations, he said. Kids hear one creak and turn it into a ghost. The adults still quietly made sure Cabin 5 never got the youngest campers. Our last summer there, something happened during a stormy session. A group of teens insisted they had all woken up around 3 a.m. at the exact same time because of a loud knocking. Not on the door, on the underside of the floor. Hard, rhythmic bangs that shook the bunk legs like someone was crawling under the cabin and slamming their fists upward. They said it lasted almost a full minute. When the counselors ran in, out of breath from sprinting through rain, the knocking had stopped. But the cabin still vibrated with it in their minds. In the morning, Oliver and I checked under the structure. There was nothing there, just old beams, dirt, and a scattering of spider webs. The ground was undisturbed mud. No drag marks, no footprints, no obvious prank. After that, Cabin 5 got its legend upgraded. Summer ended. We went back to the city, back to classes and shifts and buses. If anyone asked, we laughed it all off. Sleep-deprived teenagers, thunderstorms, creaky floors. Stories grow in places like that. A few weeks into September, Oliver called me with an idea. "Let us go up for a night," he said. "Off-season, just us. We will help the director finish closing stuff down. Grab our stuff from the staff cabin. One last camp trip. No kids. It will be fun." I hesitated. My brain threw up a quick image of Cabin 5's dark doorway and the line of trees behind it. Then I told myself I was being stupid. The camp was a place I loved, not a horror movie set. Besides, the promise of one more night under that enormous sky with no mosquitoes was tempting. We drove up in his beat-up car on a Friday afternoon. The leaves were turning, bright patches of red and gold against the dark green of the pines. The air smelled like cold earth and old campfire. The director was there when we arrived, grateful for the help. We spent the daylight hours hauling boxes, stacking canoes, dragging old benches into storage. By dusk, the work was done. The generator hummed, powering a few lights in the main buildings. The rest of the camp fell into shadow. "Want to do it?" Oliver asked, nodding toward the line of cabins. "Do what?" I said, though I knew. "1 night in 5, he said. "Just to prove it is nothing." I looked at the cabin. In the fading light, it seemed slightly darker than the others, like the trees around it leaned in closer. The logical part of my brain said we had already spent 3 summers sleeping within 50 meters of it. Whatever weirdness the kids felt, we had always chalked it up to the kind of atmosphere a creaky old building naturally had. "Fine," I said, forcing a laugh, "but if you start banging on the floor in the middle of the night, I am leaving you there." We grabbed our sleeping bags and a couple of flashlights and walked over. Inside, cabin 5 smelled like every other cabin at the end of the season. Dust, pine cleaner, the faint lingering odor of sweat and damp towels. The bunks were bare, mattresses stacked against one wall. We dragged 2 of them down, set them up in the middle of the room instead of against the walls, and unrolled our bags. The sun slipped away faster than I expected. By the time we finished setting up, the air inside the cabin had that cool, still feeling of spaces that have been empty for a while. Through the small windows, we could see the sky turning a deep indigo over the river. We killed some time telling stories, the same ones we had told around the fire a dozen times, and a few we had never shared with campers. Once the generator shut off at 10, the silence landed like a blanket. No hum of lights, no distant music from the lodge, just the creak of cooling wood and the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. "Comforting," Oliver said dryly, lying back with his hands behind his head. "Just us and the spiders." "Shut up," I said, but I smiled. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up in that abrupt way you do when something outside you pulls you up. The cabin was dark except for a thin gray line at the bottom of the door where moonlight leaked in. My watch said 3:02. My heart was already beating too fast, as if my body had sprinted ahead of my mind and realized something was wrong. For a moment, there was only the sound of my own breathing and the faint rustle of Oliver shifting in his bag. I almost chalked it up to a weird dream and forced myself to lie back down. Then I heard it. A soft, deliberate knock, not on the door, not on the walls, from beneath the floor. 3 knocks, solid, spaced evenly. The wood under my mattress shivered with each one. My throat went dry. I held my breath without meaning to. Across the room, I heard Oliver inhale sharply. Another 3 knocks, slightly louder. The bed frame creaked. It felt like something heavy was hitting the underside of the cabin floor. I fumbled for my flashlight, fingers clumsy, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating dusty rafters and the blank faces of the bunks. Nothing moved in the cabin itself. The sound was definitely coming from below. "Tell me that is you," I hissed. Oliver's head snapped toward me in the light. His eyes were wide. His hands were visible, gripping the edges of his sleeping bag. "That is not me," he said. The knocking started again. This time, it did not come in neat sets of 3. It moved. The blows traveled from under my bed toward his, a rolling series of impacts that made the floor vibrate. It sounded like fists, or maybe something harder, slamming up from the crawl space. There was a scraping undertone, like whatever was down there was dragging itself along the beams as it hit. Every instinct in me screamed to get off the floor. "Up," I said, scrambling to my feet. "Get up." We both stood on our mattresses, then stepped onto the bunk frames, trying to put as much distance as we could between us and the boards underfoot. It felt ridiculous. No piece of furniture was going to save us if the structure itself gave way. But the animal part of my brain did not care. The knocking intensified, directly under where we had been lying moments before. The entire cabin seemed to vibrate. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. From outside, there was no sound, no footsteps on the porch, no crunch of gravel, no muffled laughter from some prankster. Just that violent pounding from below, as if someone were trapped under the building and furious about it. "Someone has to be down there," Oliver whispered, voice ragged. "They have to be." "Then why are they not yelling?" I shot back. The thought lodged in both of us like an ice shard. Whoever was hitting the underside of the floor that hard and that persistently was not shouting for help. They were not calling out at all, just knocking over and over, as if following some pattern only they understood. Without thinking it through, I moved toward the door, flashlight beam shaking. The knocking followed, trailing beneath my feet, as if whatever was below was tracking my position. When I stopped, it stopped. When I took a tentative step to the left, a fresh series of blows landed under that spot a second later. It knew where we were. The realization made my knees weak. "We have to get out," I said. Oliver did not argue. We reached the door at almost the same time. My hands shook so badly I fumbled the latch twice before it gave. The moment the door swung open, cold air rushed in, smelling of damp earth and leaves. The knocking under our feet surged once, a final burst that made the boards jump under our boots. Then it stopped. Silence crashed down around us. The sudden absence of sound made my ears ring. The clearing outside was empty, lit only by a pale wash of moonlight. The line of trees beyond the cabins stood darker than the sky, unmoving. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. Our breath came out in ragged plumes. Then Oliver did something I still cannot believe he chose to do. "I'm going to look," he said. "Are you out of your mind?" I grabbed his arm. "We can check in daylight, with tools, and other people." He shook his head, stubborn. "If this is some idiot under there, I am not leaving them. And if it is something else, I need to see it now or I am never sleeping again." Against every instinct I had, I followed him around the side of the cabin. There was a small gap at the back where the foundation posts left just enough room for a person to get under if they crawled. In summer, we had used it to retrieve lost balls and clean out junk. In the dark, it looked like the entrance to a narrow throat. Oliver crouched, flashlight beams stabbing into the low space. "Hello," he called. "If someone is under there, say something. We can get help." There was no answer. The dirt and beams and tangle of old cobwebs stared back. The space looked undisturbed, a layer of dust on the joists, so even that any recent movement would have left clear streaks. There were no hands reaching out, no faces in the shadows. He swept the beams slowly from one end to the other. Nothing. The underside of the floor we had just been standing on was solid and still. We circled the cabin, checking the ground. The soil near the foundation was soft from late-season rain, holding impressions well. There were our footprints from arriving earlier, the indistinct marks of past summers, and nothing else. No fresh tracks leading to or from the crawl space. No sign that anyone had been lying under there, pounding upward. We did not go back inside. We grabbed our bags and mattresses in a frantic, uncoordinated rush and dragged them to the staff cabin, where the walls were thicker and the floor sat closer to the ground. Neither of us suggested that what we had heard might have been rodents, or the building settling, or the echo of something far away. The violence of the sound had been too direct, too targeted. In the morning, under a washed-out sky, the camp looked normal again, birds called. The river moved on as always. We checked under cabin 5 one more time, in full daylight. The dust was still undisturbed, the dirt still flat, no marks of anyone having been there in the hours since. When we told the director, he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with paperwork. "You should not have stayed in there," he said quietly. "I tell staff every year that the stories are for the kids, but I also tell them to sleep in other cabins if they can, just in case." "Just in case what?" Oliver asked, frustrated. "You think this is normal?" He shrugged, eyes sliding away toward the trees. "Places collect things, especially old ones. Sometimes it is better not to poke at whatever is comfortable in the dark corners. I will board 5 up next season. We have enough beds without it." He said it like a practical decision. But the next summer, when I visited once, cabin 5 stood empty, windows shuttered, door nailed shut, grass growing higher around the steps than around any other building. I have not slept at that camp since. I still think of it sometimes, when I wake at 3 a.m. for no reason, my heart already racing, waiting for a sound that may or may not come. The legend kids tell now, from what I have heard, is slightly different. They talk about a cabin where no one is allowed to stay, boarded up because something bad happened there once. They knock on the underside of bunks to scare each other, laughing in the dark. They do not know that one quiet off-season night, 2 counselors heard something knock back with a focus that felt almost curious to whatever was under cabin 5 that night, tracking our footsteps from below where no one should have been. Stay satisfied with empty floors and old boards. Leave the new kids out of whatever game you think you are playing.